Isn't it strange how some people can spend long periods of time doing almost nothing on the outside, while entire lives unfold on the inside? They sit quietly in rooms. They walk familiar streets. They attend conversations, meetings, social gatherings. They are present, but not entirely there, because their real engagement with life does not always happen in front of them. It often happens internally. From the outside, these people are often described as distant, distracted, or overly introspective. Sometimes they are labeled passive, sometimes unmotivated, sometimes simply stuck in their head. But those labels miss what is actually going on. They are not disengaged from reality. They are deeply engaged with meaning. And this pattern almost never forms by accident. For many of them, thinking did not begin as a personality trait. It began as a response. Early in life, they learned that the external world was not always consistent enough to rely on without reflection. Maybe emotional reactions around them were unpredictable. Maybe explanations were incomplete or unclear. Maybe rules changed without warning. So instead of trusting what was happening outside, they began constructing something more stable inside, an internal framework, a mental model of how things work. They learned to observe before acting, to analyze before responding, to replay events after they happened and simulate them long before they occurred. Thinking became a way to reduce uncertainty, not because they enjoyed complexity, but because complexity felt more reliable than unpredictability. Over time, their inner world grew more detailed than the outer one. While others learned through trial and error, they learned through anticipation. They imagined consequences. They weighed outcomes. They rehearsed conversations that might never happen. Not out of indecision, but out of care. When mistakes feel costly, preparation stops being optional. It becomes instinct. This pattern is sometimes described as a heightened form of mental vigilance. But from the inside, it does not feel like fear. It feels like responsibility. A quiet belief that if you think far enough ahead, carefully enough, deeply enough, you might prevent harm before it happens. The problem is that reality does not reward foresight in the way the mind expects. The world rewards speed, reaction, confidence even when it is incomplete. Depth is slow. Understanding takes time. Meaning rarely arrives on demand. This mismatch creates tension. People who live primarily in their minds often feel out of sync with the pace of life. Conversations move forward while they are still processing the last sentence. Decisions are expected before they have fully understood the situation. Emotions are expressed immediately while theirs unfold gradually. So they pause. Not because they do not care, but because they care with precision that often exceeds the moment they are given. Over time, a subtle distance forms. They are present but delayed, involved but rarely spontaneous, attentive but internally occupied. The distance is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply becomes familiar. There is another layer that often goes unnoticed. For many of these individuals, thinking did not only replace action, it also replaced emotional processing. Instead of feeling first and making sense of it later, they learned to translate feeling directly into thought. Sadness became analysis. Anger became explanation. Fear became planning. Not because emotions were rejected, but because they felt easier to manage once organized into logic. Thinking was not avoidance. It was containment. This is why they often struggle to answer simple emotional questions, not because they do not know how they feel, but because their emotions do not exist as single words. They exist as layered internal structures. By the time a feeling reaches the surface, it has already been examined, adjusted, and filtered. What remains is restraint or silence. From the outside, that silence can look like detachment. Internally, it is anything but empty. The real challenge emerges when the internal world becomes more familiar than lived experience. When events are processed mentally instead of physically. When possibilities feel more tangible than actions. When preparation quietly replaces participation. Because the mind can simulate almost anything, except the weight of actually being there. At some point, many of these people notice a quiet dissatisfaction. Not dramatic unhappiness, not despair, just a subtle sense that life is happening slightly to the side of them. Moments pass without fully landing. Memories feel conceptual rather than embodied. And that realization can feel unsettling. Here's the contradiction at the center of this mindset. The same depth that allows them to understand life so thoroughly can also slow their entry into it. Thinking creates clarity. Presence creates consequence. And no amount of understanding can substitute for experience. Yet awareness itself is not an ending. The moment this pattern becomes visible is also the moment it becomes interruptible. Not instantly changed, but no longer automatic. Here is the part that is rarely discussed. Living in your head is not just a trait. It is a trade-off. Because while you are thinking things through, life continues without waiting for your conclusions. Opportunities do not pause. People do not rewind. Moments do not hold their position until you feel ready. And slowly, almost invisibly, thinking can stop being preparation and begin to resemble delay. Not because you are incapable of acting, but because action never feels sufficiently justified. There is always one more angle to consider, one more risk to account for, one more internal check to run. So life gets postponed in the name of understanding it properly. That is the cost no one romanticizes. Depth has a price. Some experiences never happen, not because you avoided them, but because you examine them past the point of entry. The world does not punish this. It does not warn you. It simply continues. And one day, the question is no longer, how do I get out of my head? The question becomes this: how much of your life have you already lived only in theory? Some people do not miss life because they are distracted. They miss it because they were trying to understand it thoroughly before stepping into it. And this is the part people rarely acknowledge. Living in your head does not protect you from loss. It only changes the form it takes. While you are thinking, time keeps moving. While you are preparing, chances change. While you are waiting for clarity, life does not wait with you. Nothing dramatic happens. No warning appears. You do not fail, you simply arrive later than you expected. And sometimes that realization becomes the first moment you are fully here. Because the question is no longer whether you understand your life, but whether you are still willing to step into it, now that you see what thinking alone cannot give.